The rain had been falling for 3 days straight when you first noticed the light. Not the harsh fluorescent glow of the convenience store on the corner, nor the flickering street lamp that had been broken since summer. This was different. Softer. Golden, like honey dissolved in warm milk. It spilled onto the wet pavement from somewhere down Ashwood Lane, the narrow street you'd walked past 1,000 times without ever really seeing. It was 11:47 p.m. You know this because you checked your phone moments before, squinting at the screen as you hurried home through the drizzle, your jacket pulled tight against the autumn chill. The sidewalk glistened beneath your feet, each step sending small ripples through shallow puddles that reflected the cloudy night sky. You should have kept walking. Your apartment was only 2 blocks away, and your bed was calling to you with promises of warmth and forgetfulness. Tomorrow would bring the same routines, the same gentle monotony that had become your life. But something made you pause at the corner where Ashwood Lane branched off from Main Street. The light was still there, patient and inviting. Ashwood Lane was one of those forgotten places that cities collect like dust in corners. During the day, it was unremarkable, a handful of closed shop fronts with faded awnings, a narrow alley that seemed to lead nowhere, brick walls covered in ivy that had long ago won its battle against human intervention. You'd passed it countless times, always on your way to somewhere else, never with a reason to turn down its shadowed length. But tonight, the lane looked different. The rain created a curtain of silver threads in the air, and beyond it, perhaps 50 feet down the lane, that golden light bloomed like a secret being shared. You found yourself turning, walking. Your footsteps echoed differently here, softer somehow, as if the rain and the darkness were absorbing the sound. The light grew brighter as you approached, and you realized it was coming from a building you'd never noticed before. No, that wasn't quite right. You had noticed it, surely. It was impossible not to notice a building. But as you stood before it now, you couldn't recall ever seeing it until this moment, and that realization sent a pleasant shiver down your spine. Not fear exactly, but the feeling of standing at the edge of something unexpected. The building was 3 stories tall, narrow and dignified, wedged between 2 structures you recognized vaguely, a closed photography studio and what might have been an old tailor shop. It was built from dark brick that looked almost purple in the rain, with tall windows that glowed from within. Above the entrance, carved into a stone archway, were words in an elegant old-fashioned script. Bibliotheca Noctis Estate 1823, the Library of Night. You'd never studied Latin, but somehow the meaning was clear, as if the words had translated themselves in your mind. Below the archway, a heavy wooden door stood slightly ajar, and it was from this opening that the golden light spilled out into the rainy darkness. There was no sign explaining the hours of operation, no notice about memberships or late fees. Just that door, open like an invitation, and the light that seemed to pulse gently, as if the building itself were breathing. You should have found this strange. You should have questioned why a library would be open, appearing even at nearly midnight. But standing there in the rain, watching droplets slide down your jacket and pool at your feet, you felt only a deep, unexpected calm. The kind of calm you'd been searching for without knowing it, through all those sleepless nights and restless days. Your hand reached for the door almost of its own accord. The wood was warm beneath your palm, impossibly warm for a rainy autumn night. You pushed gently, and the door swung open without a sound, revealing what lay beyond. The entrance hall took your breath away. It was larger than should have been possible, given the narrow face of the building. The floor was laid with black and white marble tiles in a pattern that seemed to shift subtly when you weren't looking directly at it. The walls were lined with dark wood paneling that gleamed in the lamplight, and hanging from the ceiling were chandeliers, not electric, but fitted with what appeared to be actual candles, their flames steady and bright despite the draft from the open door. But it was the smell that truly transported you. Old paper and leather, wood polish and something else, something indefinable. Perhaps time itself had a scent, and this was it. Sweet and musty and comforting, like opening a trunk filled with your grandmother's treasures, or walking into a bookshop on a cold morning. You stepped inside, and the door closed behind you with the gentlest click. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full, rich, alive with the presence of 10,000 sleeping stories. You could feel them all around you, pressing in gently from every direction, not threatening but curious, as if the books themselves were aware of your presence and were waiting to see what you would do. A grand staircase curved upward to your right, its banister carved from a wood so dark it was almost black. To your left, an archway opened into what appeared to be a reading room, where you could see the edges of leather armchairs and the flicker of a fireplace. But directly ahead, through another archway, you glimpsed the main hall of the library, and it was toward this that your feet carried you. The hall was vast. Impossibly, beautifully vast. Bookshelves rose from floor to ceiling, 20 feet high at least, each one packed with volumes of every size and color. There were books bound in red leather and books covered in green cloth. Books with gold lettering and books with no markings at all. Thin volumes that looked as if they contained poetry, and thick tomes that might hold entire universes between their covers. The shelves stretched back farther than you could see, creating corridors and alcoves, little pockets of shadow and light. Here and there, comfortable chairs had been placed at seemingly random intervals, a wing-back chair upholstered in burgundy velvet, a simple wooden bench with cushions, a chaise lounge that looked as if it had been transported from a Victorian parlor. More candles burned throughout the space, suspended in chandeliers, set in sconces on the walls, clustered on tables. The effect was magical. The light danced and flickered, making the spines of the books shimmer, turning the whole library into something alive and breathing. And it was warm. Blessedly, perfectly warm, with that dry heat that only comes from old buildings with good radiators and burning fires. You could feel the chill of the rain beginning to leave your bones. You walked slowly down the main aisle, your wet shoes silent on the polished wooden floor. The sections weren't labeled in any way you recognized. You passed a shelf marked Dreams Deferred, and another titled Conversations Never Had. One section was simply labeled blue, and when you looked closer, you saw that every book on that shelf did indeed have a blue cover, in shades ranging from powder to navy to azure to midnight. There was no one else here. No librarian at a desk, no other late-night visitors wandering the stacks. Just you and the books and the gentle, watchful silence. At the far end of the main hall, you discovered a seating area arranged around a fireplace that was easily 6 feet tall. A fire burned there, crackling softly, its light painting the surrounding chairs in shades of orange and gold. Before the fire sat the most inviting chair you'd ever seen, deep and wide, upholstered in a fabric that might have been dark green or might have been black, with a high back and arms that looked perfect for resting a cup of tea. On a small table beside the chair, you noticed a book. Just one, lying open as if someone had been reading it and had only just stepped away. The pages were yellowed with age, and the text was handwritten in an elegant script. Curious, you leaned closer. The words weren't in English. They weren't in any language you recognized, and yet, as your eyes moved across the page, you found you could understand them. Not by reading exactly, but by feeling. The story seeped into your mind like warmth spreading through cold hands. It was a story about a traveler who walked through rain-soaked streets, searching for something they couldn't name. A story about finding doors that opened only when you weren't looking for them. A story about how some places exist outside of normal time, held in the spaces between seconds, waiting patiently for those who need them most. You realized with a start that it was your story. Or rather, it was becoming your story, even as you read it. The fire popped gently, sending up a small shower of sparks that died before they reached the hearth. You straightened up, looking around the library with new eyes. The rain continued outside. You could hear it now, a soft percussion against the windows. But here, inside, everything was still and safe and impossibly peaceful. A clock began to chime somewhere in the building. You counted the tones, deep and resonant. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Midnight. The moment the last chime faded, you felt something shift. The library seemed to settle more deeply into itself, as if it had been holding its breath and could now exhale. The candlelight grew steadier. The fire burned warmer. And you understood, without anyone having to tell you, that you had arrived at precisely the right moment. The Library of Night was open, and it had been waiting for you. You settled into the chair by the fire, and it embraced you like an old friend. The cushions seemed to adjust themselves to your exact shape, supporting you in ways you didn't know you needed. The warmth from the fireplace wrapped around you like a blanket, and for the first time in what felt like months, your shoulders truly relaxed. Outside, the rain continued its gentle song against the windows. Inside, the fire whispered its own quiet melody. You let your eyes close for just a moment, breathing in the scent of old paper and wood smoke. When you opened them again, you were no longer alone. An elderly woman stood near one of the bookshelves, perhaps 20 feet away. She was examining a book with the careful attention of someone reading a language written in starlight. You hadn't heard her approach. There had been no footsteps, no rustle of clothing, no sound at all. She was simply there, as if she had always been there, and you were only now noticing. She wore a long dress in a deep plum color, old-fashioned but elegant, with a shawl draped over her shoulders. Her hair was silver white, pulled back in a soft bun, and when she turned to look at you, her eyes were the warm brown of polished chestnuts. "Good evening," she said, and her voice was exactly what you expected it would be, gentle, cultured, with an accent you couldn't quite place. Or perhaps I should say good morning, as we've just crossed into a new day. You started to rise from the chair, but she held up a hand. "Please, don't disturb yourself. That chair has chosen you, and it's rude to refuse such hospitality." She smiled, and the expression transformed her face, revealing laugh lines earned over many years of joy. "I'm Adelaide. I look after this place." You began, but she interrupted gently. "I know who you are." The library knows who everyone is, the moment they step through the door. She moved closer, her movements fluid and unhurried, and settled into another chair near the fire. "The question is not who you are, but what you're seeking. Though I suppose you may not know that yourself yet. You found your voice. I didn't even know this place existed. I've walked past Ashwood Lane hundreds of times." "Yes," Adelaide said, nodding slowly. "Most people do. The library is always here, but it's only visible to those who need it. And only at midnight." Something about that hour, the way it stands between one day and the next, belonging fully to neither, creates a thin place in the world. A doorway. She reached for a teapot that sat on a small table between your chairs. You were certain it hadn't been there a moment ago, but somehow its presence felt entirely natural. Adelaide poured amber liquid into 2 delicate cups painted with tiny flowers. "Chamomile and lavender," she said, offering you a cup. "With just a hint of something else. A specialty of the house." The tea was perfect, hot but not scalding, sweet but not cloying, with an herbal warmth that seemed to spread through your entire body from the first sip. You felt your last remaining tensions begin to dissolve. "What is this place exactly?" you asked, cradling the cup in your hands. Adelaide gazed into the fire, her expression thoughtful. "The library has had many names over the centuries. Bibliotheca Noctis is the most recent, but before that it was called the House of Unfinished Stories, and before that, the Repository of Dreams. Some simply call it the Between." She took a sip of her own tea before continuing. "There are places in this world that exist outside the normal flow of time. Places that gather things, lost things, forgotten things, things that slipped through the cracks of the waking world. This library gathers stories." "What kind of stories?" "Every kind." Adelaide gestured to the shelves surrounding you. "Stories that were never written down. Stories that were lost before they could be finished. Dreams that felt so real you wake up certain they must have happened. Conversations you wish you'd had. Memories you're not sure are yours. Lives you might have lived if you'd made different choices." You looked around the vast hall with new understanding. The flickering candlelight now seemed to reveal glimpses of movement between the shelves, not threatening, but as if the books themselves were shifting, whispering to one another, sharing secrets. "Every book here," Adelaide continued, "contains a story that belongs somewhere between reality and imagination. Some are true stories that the world forgot. Others are fictional stories so vivid they became partially real. And some," she paused, meeting your eyes, "are stories that haven't happened yet but might, if the right person finds them." You set down your teacup, drawn by curiosity despite the drowsy comfort settling over you. Can I read them?" "My dear," Adelaide said with that gentle smile, "why else would you be here? The library doesn't reveal itself to people who don't need its stories. Though I should warn you, reading here is not quite like reading in the ordinary world. The stories have a way of becoming real while you're inside them. Not dangerously real, you understand, but real enough that when you finish, you'll carry them with you differently than ordinary books." She stood, moving with surprising grace for someone of her apparent age. "Come, let me show you how to navigate. The library can be disorienting for first-time visitors, and I'd hate for you to get lost. Well, permanently lost, anyway. A little bit of lostness is part of the experience." You followed Adelaide deeper into the stacks, leaving the fire's warmth behind, but finding that the library maintained its comfortable temperature throughout. The aisles between the shelves were wider than they'd appeared from a distance, and they seemed to stretch back impossibly far, creating a labyrinth of literature. "The sections aren't organized the way you might expect," Adelaide explained, running her fingers along the spines of books as she walked. "We don't use the Dewey Decimal System here, nor any system the waking world would recognize. The books arrange themselves according to emotional truth rather than subject matter." She stopped at a shelf labeled Thresholds. "Here, for instance, are stories about moments of transition, first days and last days, weddings and funerals, sunrise and sunset, birth and death, naturally, but also smaller thresholds. The moment before you tell someone you love them, the second after you understand a truth you can't unknow. Adelaide pulled out a slim volume bound in grey cloth. The title was printed in silver, The Moment Between Question and Answer. She opened it, and you glimpsed text that seemed to shimmer and move. Each book chooses its own reader in a way, she said, sliding it back onto the shelf. You can't force a connection, but when you find the right story, or when it finds you, you'll know. There's a feeling, like recognition, like meeting someone you've known your entire life but are only now seeing for the first time. You continued walking, passing section after section. Sorrows transformed. Joy remembered. Questions without answers. Answers without questions. The color of loneliness. The sound of stars. Some sections were vast, with hundreds of volumes. Others contained only a handful of books, sitting alone on wide shelves like rare gems in a jeweler's case. This section here, Adelaide said, gesturing to a cozy alcove lined with books in warm colors, reds and oranges and golds, contains comfort stories. Tales specifically for nights when sleep won't come and the world feels too heavy. Many visitors spend their time here. There's no shame in it. We all need comfort sometimes. She pulled out a book at random. Its cover was the deep red of autumn leaves, and the title read, The House That Remembered Everyone Who'd Ever Loved It. This one is particularly soothing. It's about a house that stands on a hill, and every person who ever lived there left behind a little bit of warmth, so that even when it's empty, it's never really alone. Some people say they can feel the house's gratitude when they read it. Adelaide returned the book to its place with obvious affection, then turned to you with a more serious expression. There is one important rule in the library, she said. Only one, really, but it must not be broken. You may read any book you find, and you may stay as long as you need to, but you cannot take the books with you when you leave. They exist only here, in this space between midnight and dawn. If you tried to take one through the door, it would simply cease to be. A blank cover, empty pages. The story would be lost. Why? You asked. Because these stories are made of possibility and shadow. They can only survive in this liminal space, this place that exists between heartbeats. In the full light of day, under the harsh reality of the waking world, they would dissolve like morning mist. She smiled sadly. But don't worry. What you read here, you'll remember. Perhaps not every word, but the feeling of it, the truth at its heart, that stays with you. You nodded, understanding somehow that this was right. Some things were meant to be experienced, not possessed. Adelaide led you to another section, this one with a brass plaque that read simply, Beginnings. I think you might find what you need here, she said. Stories about starting over, about finding new paths, about discovering that the life you thought was set in stone is really still being written. She placed a hand on your shoulder, a brief touch that conveyed both warmth and understanding. I'll leave you to explore on your own. That's how it works best, wandering, browsing, letting yourself be drawn to what calls to you. I'll be nearby if you need anything. The library is large, but you won't get lost. Not truly. It won't let you. And with that, Adelaide drifted away down one of the aisles, her plum-colored dress disappearing around a corner like smoke dispersing. You were alone again with the books. The rain had softened to a gentle patter. The candles burned steadily. And before you stretched row after row of stories, each one waiting patiently for the right reader. You reached out and let your fingers trail across the spines, feeling the different textures: smooth leather, rough cloth, embossed paper, cool silk. The books seemed to hum under your touch, each one vibrating with its own frequency, its own voice. One book drew your attention more than the others. It was bound in midnight blue leather, worn soft with age, and had no title on its spine. But when you pulled it from the shelf, you saw words appear on the cover, shimmering into existence as if written by an invisible hand. The story of someone who found their way home when they didn't know they'd been lost. Your breath caught. Yes, this was the one. You carried it to a nearby reading chair, this one upholstered in deep blue velvet, matching the book's cover, and settled in. The chair was positioned under a lamp that hung from the ceiling, its light soft and golden, perfect for reading. You opened the book, and the library around you began to fade. The story of someone who found their way home when they didn't know they'd been lost. The story didn't begin with words. It began with a feeling, the sensation of walking through fog at dawn, when the world is muted and soft, and you can't quite tell where the ground ends and the sky begins. Then came the words, appearing on the page not all at once, but gradually, like stars emerging as twilight deepens to night. Once, in a city much like your own, there lived a person who had forgotten how to dream. This wasn't a dramatic forgetting, not the result of any tragedy or trauma. It was a slow fade, like colors left too long in sunlight. One day they simply realized that when they closed their eyes at night, there was only darkness. No images, no stories, no strange logic of the sleeping mind. Just blank, empty nothing. At first, they didn't mind. Sleep without dreams was efficient. They woke up feeling rested, went to work, came home, ate dinner, watched television, went to bed. Days became weeks, became months, became years. Time moved like water running through their fingers, present, then immediately past, leaving nothing behind. They didn't notice they were disappearing. As you read, something strange happened. The words on the page seemed to lift away, no longer just symbols printed on paper, but actual events unfolding around you. You were still aware of sitting in the chair, still conscious of the library surrounding you, but you were also somewhere else. You were walking through a gray city at dusk, watching people hurry past with their heads down, everyone rushing toward home or away from something. The buildings were tall and anonymous. The sky was the color of old newspaper. Rain threatened but never quite fell. And you understood that you were experiencing the story from inside it, living it as you read it. The person, for that is what they'd become, just the person, no longer a name or an identity or a self, walked the same route every day. Home to work, work to home. Sometimes they varied the path by a block or two, but it made no difference. Everything looked the same. Everything felt the same. Until one evening, when the rain finally came. You felt the first drops on your skin, cold, sharp, real. The sky opened up, and suddenly everyone was running, holding briefcases and newspapers over their heads, ducking into doorways and under awnings. But the person kept walking at the same steady pace, letting the rain soak through their coat, their hair, their skin. And that's when they noticed it. A narrow street they'd never seen before, branching off from their usual route. The rain seemed to fall differently there, creating a curtain of silver that made the street look like a secret, a whisper, a possibility. They turned down the street without knowing why. The buildings here were older, covered in ivy, with windows that glowed with warm yellow light. The rain created music as it hit the cobblestones, a rhythm that felt ancient and familiar at once. And at the end of the street, barely visible through the downpour, was a door, a red door. It stood alone in a brick wall, with no building attached to it that the person could see. Just a door, painted the color of poppies or blood or Valentine hearts, with a brass handle that gleamed despite the rain. The person stood before it, water streaming down their face, and realized they were feeling something for the first time in years. Not happiness, exactly. Not excitement. But something. A stirring. A waking. They reached for the handle. You felt your own hand moving, felt the cool brass under your palm, felt the door swing open to reveal a garden. Impossible, beautiful, existing in full summer bloom despite the autumn rain that was somehow no longer falling. Roses climbed the walls, red, white, yellow, pink. Lavender swayed in a breeze that smelled of honey and earth. Trees heavy with fruit, apples, pears, plums, created a canopy overhead, their leaves rustling with what sounded like conversations in a language you almost understood. And everywhere, absolutely everywhere, were books. They grew on the trees like fruit. They bloomed from the rose bushes like flowers. They carpeted the ground like moss. Some were open, their pages fluttering in the breeze. Others were closed, their spines glinting in the golden light that seemed to have no source but illuminated everything. The person stepped into the garden, and the red door closed behind them. But they didn't feel trapped. They felt, for the first time since they could remember, free. They walked among the books, touching them gently. When their fingers brushed the cover of a small green volume growing near a fountain, the book opened itself, and words spilled out, not to be read, but to be breathed, to be absorbed through the skin, to be remembered by the bones. The book told the story of the person's childhood, the real childhood, not the sanitized version they thought they remembered. It showed them climbing trees and skinning knees and laughing so hard milk came out their nose at dinner. It showed them building forts and catching fireflies and staying up past bedtime to read by flashlight under the covers. It showed them dreaming. The person realized they were crying. Not from sadness, but from recognition. This person they'd been, this child full of wonder and imagination, they were still there waiting, patient as a seed in winter waiting for spring. You felt tears on your own cheeks and realized you were crying too, though you weren't sure if the tears belonged to you or to the person in the story or to some combination of both. The person touched another book, this one bound in blue cloth and suspended from a branch like unusual fruit. This book showed them who they'd become, the gray person walking gray streets under gray skies. But it also showed them why. They saw the moments when they'd chosen safety over risk, seen the times they'd said no instead of yes. Watched themselves slowly, carefully, meticulously building walls to keep out pain, not realizing they were also keeping out everything else. Joy, connection, surprise, hope. The walls had worked. They'd stopped feeling pain, but they'd also stopped feeling. I didn't mean to, the person whispered to the book, to the garden, to themselves. I didn't know. And the garden seemed to whisper back, but now you do. The scene shifted again. You were still in the garden, but time was moving differently now, faster, like watching a film on fast forward. The person explored the garden, touching book after book, each one revealing something, a memory, a possibility, a truth. They ate fruit from the trees, and it tasted like Christmas morning. They drank water from the fountain, and it sparkled with laughter. Asterisk gradually, color began to return to them. First just hints, a touch of pink in their cheeks, a gleam in their eyes. Then more, their coat, which had been gray, turned deep forest green. Their hair caught threads of gold in the garden's light. They were becoming real again. And as they became more real, the garden began to change too. The books multiplied, covering every surface. The fruits grew more abundant. The The flowers bloomed more intensely. It was as if the garden fed on attention, on presence, on being truly seen. "What is this place?" the person asked aloud. A voice answered, though no one was visible. It came from everywhere and nowhere, kind and ancient. "This is the garden that grows inside everyone who has forgotten how to dream. You've always carried it with you. You simply stopped visiting." "How do I get back here?" the person asked, suddenly afraid. "I can't lose this again." "You won't," the voice assured them. "The door will always be there waiting. Sometimes it will be red, sometimes blue or green or golden. Sometimes it won't look like a door at all, but you'll recognize it. Now that you've remembered, you'll always recognize it." "What do I do now?" "Now," said the voice, "you wake up." You blinked and realized you were back in the library, sitting in the blue velvet chair under the golden lamp. The book in your lap was closed. You couldn't remember closing it. The page you'd been reading simply ended. But the feeling of the garden stayed with you, the scent of roses, the weight of fruit in your hand, the sensation of tears drying on your cheeks. It had been real as anything you'd ever experienced. You sat there for a long moment, letting it settle into you. The library was quiet around you, patient, giving you time to return fully to yourself. When you finally stood, your legs were slightly unsteady. How long had you been reading? It felt like hours, but when you looked at the clock on a nearby wall, an ornate thing with a pendulum that swung with hypnotic regularity, you saw that only 20 minutes had passed. Time moved differently here indeed. You returned the blue book to its shelf, but as you slid it back into place, you noticed the title had changed. Where before it had read the story of someone who found their way home when they didn't know they'd been lost, it now said, "Thank you for reading me." You smiled, touching the spine once more in farewell, then turned to explore more of the library. The next section you found was labeled Quiet Wonders, and it was filled with books about small, beautiful things. One was titled Every Cup of Tea Ever Brewed, in Order of Perfect Temperature. Another, The Secret Lives of Houseplants. A third, Conversations Between Rain and Rooftops. You pulled out a thin volume called The Sound of Snow Falling on Water. It had no words inside, just page after page of the most delicate illustrations, snowflakes drifting down toward a still lake, each flake rendered in exquisite detail. As you turned the pages, you could almost hear it, that particular hush that comes when snow meets water, the gentle kiss of ice dissolving into itself. It was, you realized, one of the most peaceful things you'd ever experienced. You placed the book back carefully and continued your exploration. As you wandered deeper into the library, you began to notice something strange. The sections were rearranging themselves. Not dramatically, you never caught them in the act of moving, but a shelf that had been on your right was now on your left. A section labeled Forgotten Languages, that you'd passed 5 minutes ago, was somehow ahead of you again. The library was leading you somewhere. You didn't feel afraid. If anything, you felt curious, excited, even. You let yourself be guided, trusting the invisible hand that seemed to be showing you the way. After several more turns, you found yourself in a part of the library you hadn't seen before. The ceiling here was lower, more intimate, and the shelves were made of a pale wood that almost seemed to glow. The books here were different too, smaller, older, with covers made of materials you couldn't identify. Bark, perhaps, or pressed flowers, or something else entirely. A brass plaque on the wall read, "The Archive of Lost Things." You reached for the nearest book, a tiny volume bound in what looked like moth wings, iridescent and impossibly delicate. The moment your fingers touched it, you heard something. A sound like wind chimes, but distant, as if coming from very far away or very long ago. The book fell open in your hands, and you saw it contained only one word per page, each word floating in the center of otherwise blank paper. Saudaid Mamahlapanatapai Fernway Komaribi, words from different languages, each one describing a feeling or experience that English had no single word for. As you read each one, you understood its meaning not intellectually, but emotionally, felt it bloom inside your chest like a flower opening. Saudaid, that deep melancholic longing for something or someone that is absent, possibly forever. Mamahlapanatapai, the wordless, meaningful look shared between two people who both desire something but are both unwilling to initiate it. You close the book gently, moved by these captured feelings, these experiences that were so specific and so universal all at once. Beautiful, isn't it? You turned to find you had company. A young man sat in a chair you were certain hadn't been there a moment ago. He looked to be in his 20s, with dark skin, close-cropped hair, and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. He wore modern clothes, jeans and a sweater, which seemed anachronistic in this timeless space, but also somehow perfectly right. "Sorry," he said, holding up his hands. "Didn't mean to startle you. I'm Marcus. First time here." You nodded, finding your voice. "Is it that obvious?" He laughed, a warm sound that made you smile despite yourself. "Little bit. First-timers always have this look, like they're not sure if they're dreaming or if this is real. Been coming here for 3 years now, and I still get that look sometimes." 3 years. You moved closer, intrigued. "You can come back?" "Oh yeah. Once you find the library, you can return whenever you need to. Well, whenever it's midnight and you need it, anyway. It doesn't appear every night. But when you're searching for something, even if you don't know what, and it's midnight, the door opens." He gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit. Unless you were in the middle of exploring." "No, you sat down, realizing how much you wanted to talk to someone, to share this experience." "I don't even know where to start. This place is impossible, magical, the best thing that ever happened to you." Marcus grinned. "Yeah, I get it. I found the library during the worst time of my life. Just lost my job, my relationship had ended, I was living on my friend's couch and feeling like a complete failure. I was walking around at night because I couldn't sleep, couldn't stand to lie there staring at the ceiling anymore. And then I saw the light." He pulled a book from the shelf next to him. You noticed he moved through the library with the ease of long familiarity. "Found this that first night. Changed everything." The book he held was bound in deep purple cloth, worn soft with handling. The title read, "The Art of Beginning Again." "I must have read it a dozen times that first night," Marcus said, his voice softer now. "Each time I read it, it showed me something different. First time, it was about a painter who lost her sight but learned to create sculptures instead. Second time, it was about a musician who lost his hearing but found he could feel music through vibrations, through the way sound moved through solid objects. Every story was about transformation, about loss becoming something else." "Did it help?" you asked. "More than help. It saved me." He looked at the book with obvious affection. "See, the library doesn't just show you stories. It shows you the stories you need, the ones that will open doors in your own life." After reading that book, I went back to my friend's place, and instead of feeling sorry for myself, I started asking, what can I build from here? What new thing wants to be born? What did you do? Marcus's smile was slightly sheepish. Started a podcast about urban gardens. Sounds random, right? But I'd always loved plants, and I lived in a city where nobody thought they could grow anything. Now I teach people how to create green spaces in impossible places. Rooftops, fire escapes, abandoned lots. It's not what I thought my life would be, but it's exactly what it was supposed to become. You felt something stir in your chest, hope, maybe, or possibility. The library has a way of showing you who you actually are, Marcus continued, not who you think you're supposed to be. It strips away all the shoulds and shows you the coulds. The infinite could best. Before you could respond, a soft sound drifted through the air. Bells, perhaps, or wind moving through crystal. Both you and Marcus looked up. Ah, Marcus said, standing. That's my cue. There's a book calling me from the upper floors. Happens sometimes. You'll be reading or talking, and you'll hear it, feel it. Like a tug on a string you didn't know was attached to your heart. He paused, meeting your eyes. One piece of advice? Don't rush. Some people try to read as much as they can, like they're cramming for an exam. But the library isn't about quantity. Read what calls to you. Sit with it. Let it settle into your bones. You'll know when you've found what you need. Will I see you again? You asked. Probably. Like I said, been coming here for years. The library has a way of bringing people together who need to meet. He gave a small wave and walked away into the stacks, his footsteps fading until there was only silence again. You sat alone, processing the conversation. The idea that others came here, that this was a shared experience, somehow made it more real and more magical at once. The archive of lost things beckoned to you again. You rose and continued browsing, running your fingers along the spines. Each book felt different, some warm, some cool, some that seemed to vibrate with barely contained energy. One book caught your eye. It was bound in midnight black leather with silver clasps, and unlike the others, it seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. There was no title on the spine or cover, but you knew somehow that this book was important, that it had been waiting for you specifically. You carried it to a reading nook tucked between two shelves, a small space with a window that looked out onto nothing. Not darkness, not light, just an absence, a space where reality seemed to take a breath. A single candle burned on the windowsill, its flame perfectly still. You opened the book. The book of things that never happened but should have. This story began differently than the first. Instead of words appearing gradually, the entire first page was filled with text, handwritten in ink that shifted colors as you read, now silver, now gold, now the deep blue of twilight. Listen carefully, reader. This is the story of the collector, and it is also your story, for all stories are mirrors, and all mirrors show us who we truly are if we dare to look long enough. You felt yourself slipping into the story again, but this time you were aware of it happening, conscious of the transition. It was like sinking into warm water, letting it close over your head while still being able to breathe. The collector lived in a house that shouldn't exist. It stood at the intersection of 5 roads that never crossed anywhere else in the world. The house had 47 rooms, and each room contained artifacts of moments that never happened, photographs of events that didn't occur, ticket stubs from shows that were never performed, love letters written but never sent, apologies that died in throats before they could be spoken. The collector's job was to preserve these unhappenings, to give them a place where they could exist since reality had rejected them. You found yourself standing in the collector's house. It materialized around you with the logic of dreams. One moment you were aware of sitting in the library, the next you were here, and both things were equally true. The first room you entered was filled with letters. They overflowed from shelves, spilled out of boxes, lay in drifts on the floor like autumn leaves. All of them sealed, addressed, stamped, but never mailed. You picked one up at random. The envelope was yellowed with age, addressed to someone named Sarah in handwriting that shook with emotion. Inside, you found a letter from a father to his daughter, telling her he was proud of her, that he'd always loved her, that his silence had never been disappointment but fear that he would say the wrong thing, show his feelings incorrectly, fail her somehow. He died with the letter in his desk drawer. A voice whispered, not Adelaide's voice, not Marcus's, but the voice of the story itself. Sarah never knew. She thought, until the day she died 40 years later, that her father had been ashamed of her choices. You felt tears prick your eyes and carefully returned the letter to its place. So many unopened doors, you whispered. Yes, the story answered. The collector keeps them all. Someone must bear witness to what might have been. You moved to the next room. This one contained objects frozen in time. A baseball, suspended in midair at the exact moment it would have gone over the fence for a game-winning home run if the batter hadn't held back his swing at the last second. A wedding dress that was bought but never worn, hanging in a shaft of perpetual sunlight. A pair of tickets to Paris that were purchased but never used, still crisp and fresh as the day they were printed. Each object thrummed with potential energy, with the weight of choices not made. The collector walked among these artifacts every day. The story continued, and you saw them now. A figure in a long coat, neither young nor old, neither male nor female, just a presence, a consciousness devoted to preservation. But the collector's true work wasn't just collecting. It was understanding. Because for everything that never happened, there was a reason. And sometimes those reasons were full of wisdom, and sometimes they were full of fear, and the collector's job was to know the difference. You followed the collector through room after room. A room of unspoken declarations of love. A room of careers never started. A room of chances never taken. A room of forgiveness never offered. Each one was beautiful and terrible in equal measure. Finally, the collector led you to a room at the very heart of the house. This room was different from the others. It was empty except for a single mirror that covered the entire far wall, floor to ceiling. The mirror's frame was made of intertwined branches, and growing from these branches were tiny silver leaves that chimed softly when the air moved. The collector gestured to the mirror. Look, the story whispered. See what you need to see. You approached slowly, almost afraid. When you looked into the mirror, you didn't see yourself as you were now. You saw yourself as you might have been, dozens of versions, hundreds, infinite variations. You saw yourself having taken that job in another city. Saw yourself saying yes instead of no, no instead of yes. Saw yourself with different partners, different friends, different lives. Some versions looked happier, some sadder. Some were recognizable, others were strangers who happened to wear your face. But then the images shifted, and you saw something else. You saw yourself in moments you'd missed, opportunities you'd let slip by without even noticing. The person you didn't talk to at the coffee shop who might have become your best friend. The class you didn't take that would have changed your career. The trip you didn't go on. The risk you didn't take. Not all of them were missed opportunities for great things. Some were small, tiny, even. A conversation, a smile, a moment of connection. But as you watched these unlived moments flow past like a river of possibilities, you understood something. The paths you didn't take were just as much a part of your story as the ones you did. The collector spoke for the first time, and their voice was like wind through empty rooms, People think I collect regrets. But I don't. I collect choices. Every choice you make creates a world where you didn't make it. Every path you take means abandoning 100 others. This isn't tragedy. This is what it means to have a life. But how do you know which choices are right? You asked your reflection, asked the collector, asked yourself. You don't, the collector said simply. And that's the point. There is no right path. There are only paths. Some lead to joy, some to sorrow, most to a mixture of both. The gift isn't in choosing correctly. The gift is in choosing it all, and then living with grace inside the choice you made. The mirror rippled like water, and suddenly you were looking at a specific moment. You recognized it immediately, a choice you'd made years ago that you'd been second-guessing ever since. You watched yourself make the choice again, saw it play out, saw the consequences. Then the mirror showed you the alternative, the choice you didn't make. And you watched that play out too, saw its consequences, different from your actual life, but not necessarily better. Just different. Do you see? The collector asked. You've been carrying the weight of this choice, wondering if you got it wrong. But there was no wrong answer. Just two possible lives, both with their own beauty and pain. You chose one. Someone else, some other version of you in some other world, chose the other. Both of you are living real lives. Both are valid. Something inside you loosened. A knot you'd been carrying for so long you'd forgotten it was there. You felt it unravel, felt the release spread through your chest like warmth. Thank you, you whispered. The collector nodded. This is my gift. Not to change the past, but to help people stop carrying the weight of paths not taken. You can honor the roads you didn't travel without living in them. You can acknowledge what might have been while still fully inhabiting what is. The room began to fade. The mirror dissolved into mist, and the mist became words on a page, and you were back in the library, sitting in your reading nook, the black book open in your lap. The last page held a single sentence. Every ending is a kind of beginning, if you let it be. You closed the book and sat in silence for a long time, feeling fundamentally changed in a way you couldn't quite articulate. The candle on the windowsill had burned down an inch, maybe two. Outside the window, the nothing space remained, peaceful and patient. When you finally stood, your legs were steadier than before. You returned the black book to its shelf, whispering a thank you to it, to the collector, to whatever force had led you to exactly that story at exactly that moment. You checked the clock in the main hall as you passed it. 1:47 a.m. You'd been in the library for nearly 2 hours, but it felt both longer and shorter than that. Time was slippery here, meaningful in a different way. Adelaide appeared beside you as if summoned by your thoughts. She carried a tray with a fresh pot of tea and small cookies that smelled of butter and vanilla. You look like someone who's been traveling, she said with her gentle smile. The stories take us far, don't they? Come, sit, rest. You followed her to a new sitting area, this one arranged around a window that actually showed something. The street outside, Ashwood Lane, still glistening with rain. You could see the real world out there, continuing on without you, indifferent to the magic happening inside these walls. Do people out there know? You asked, accepting a cup of tea. About this place? Some do. Most don't. Adelaide settled into her chair with a soft sigh. The library exists. In that strange space between knowing and unknowing. People walk past it every night, but only certain people, at certain times, can see it. It's not that we're hiding. It's that most people aren't looking. What makes someone able to see it? Adelaide considered this, taking a delicate sip of her tea. Need, mostly. Not desperate need, necessarily, but a seeking quality. A readiness to discover something that can't be explained by normal logic. Children used to see the library more often, but as the world has grown louder and faster, even they rarely notice anymore. Now it's mostly adults who find us, people who've reached a threshold in their lives, even if they don't know it yet. Like me. Like you. Her eyes twinkled. You came here thinking you were just walking home in the rain, but some part of you knew you were looking for something. The library felt that searching and opened its door. You thought about this, about the restlessness that had been growing in you for months. The sense that something needed to change but not knowing what or how. How long can I stay? You asked. Until dawn. When the sun rises, the library fades. You'll find yourself standing on Ashwood Lane, and the building will be gone. Just a blank wall where the door was. Adelaide's expression grew more serious. You can't stay forever, dear. This place exists to serve the living world, not to replace it. You come here to remember, to learn, to rest, and then you must return and live what you've learned. But I can come back? If you need to. If it's midnight and your heart is searching, the door will be here. She reached over and patted your hand. But you won't need to come as often as you think. The library gives you what you need to carry forward. Most visitors find they only need to return a few times a year. Some less. The really successful ones, she smiled, stop coming altogether because they've learned to find the magic in their own lives. You drank your tea slowly, savoring the warmth and the spices you couldn't quite identify. The cookies were perfect, crispy on the edges, soft in the middle, tasting somehow of childhood and comfort. Can I ask you something? You ventured. Are you real? Or are you part of the library somehow? Adelaide laughed, a sound like wind chimes. What's the difference? I'm as real as anything here. I exist because the library needs someone to tend it, and I love this work. Have I always been Adelaide? Have I always been in this form? Perhaps not. But right now, in this moment, I'm exactly who I appear to be, and that's as real as anything gets. She stood, collecting the tea things. Now, you have a few more hours before dawn. I suggest you visit the upper floors. You've only seen the ground level so far, and there's so much more. The second floor holds stories of adventure and journey. The third floor, her voice dropped to a whisper, contains the rarest books. The ones that only appear once in a lifetime. You might find something extraordinary there. How do I get up? Adelaide pointed to the grand staircase you'd noticed when you first entered. Up. Always up. The library has a way of revealing itself in layers. You must earn each floor by being ready for it. She drifted away again, leaving you alone with your curiosity. You approached the staircase. The steps were wide and shallow, covered in a carpet the color of deep red wine. The banister was smooth under your hand, carved from that same dark wood that seemed to absorb and reflect light simultaneously. As you climbed, you noticed paintings on the walls. Not ordinary paintings, but images that moved ever so slightly when you weren't looking directly at them. A painted ocean with waves that rolled. A forest where leaves occasionally fell. A portrait of a woman whose eyes followed you, not menacingly, but with gentle interest. The second floor opened into a vast space even larger than the first. Where the ground floor had felt cozy and intimate despite its size, this floor felt expansive, adventurous. The ceiling rose higher, and here and there were skylights showing not the dark sky outside but other skies. Dawn skies, sunset skies, skies full of stars you'd never seen. The books here were bound in brighter colors, blues and greens and vibrant reds. The section titles reflected the adventurous spirit, Journeys Across Impossible Distances, Maps to Nowhere, The Chronicles of What Lies Beyond, Tales from the Edge of Everything. You pulled out a book at random, this one bound in sky blue leather, the log of the ship that sailed through clouds. Opening it, you found yourself immediately on the deck of a vessel, but instead of water below, there were clouds, vast, pillowy formations in every shade of white and gray. The ship cut through them like a knife through cream, leaving contrails in its wake. The crew members were people from different times and places, all united in their quest to discover what lay at the edge of the sky. You read for what might have been minutes or hours, entranced by descriptions of cloud castles and sky whales, of storms made of pure light, of discovering that heaven wasn't a place but a direction, one you could sail toward infinitely without ever arriving, and that this endless journey was the whole point. When you finally closed the book, you felt energized rather than drowsy. These stories weren't meant to put you to sleep, but to wake something up inside you, the part that wanted to explore, to risk, to venture into unknown territories. You moved through the second floor, sampling books here and there. Each one was a window into a different kind of journey. Some were external adventures across deserts and oceans. Others were internal expeditions through memory and consciousness. All of them shared a common thread, transformation through movement, through being willing to leave the familiar behind. Finally, you gathered your courage and climbed to the third floor. You placed the book back carefully and continued your exploration, feeling something calling to you from deeper within the library. As you wandered, the sections seemed to shift and guide you. A shelf that had been on your right was now on your left. The library was leading you somewhere specific, and you trusted it. You found yourself before the grand staircase, its dark wood gleaming in the candlelight. Something told you it was time to go up, to see what awaited on the higher floors. The second floor opened before you, vast and filled with books in vibrant colors. These were stories of adventure and transformation, journeys across impossible distances. You paused briefly at a book called The Ship That Sailed Through Clouds, reading just enough to feel your spirit lift with wonder. But something was pulling you higher still. The third floor. You climbed once more, and when you stepped onto the third floor, everything changed. The air shimmered with possibility. The books here glowed softly, each one radiating its own gentle light. The ceiling showed stars that moved and shifted, forming constellations you'd never seen but somehow recognized. This floor was smaller, more intimate. Fewer shelves, but each book felt monumentally important. A small placard read, "The books that matter most." And there, in the center of the room on a pedestal bathed in starlight, was a single large book. As you approached, words appeared on its cover in luminous golden script. "Your book." Your heart thundered. Adelaide appeared beside you, her presence comforting. "Every person who reaches the third floor finds this," she said softly. "Your own story. Not the one you tell yourself, but the truth of your life, the patterns, the themes, the beauty you've been too close to see." You opened the book with trembling hands. The pages showed your life in images and moments. Childhood joys you'd forgotten. Teenage heartbreaks. Small victories and quiet defeats. But more than memories, you saw patterns, the ways you'd built walls, then climbed over them. Closed doors, then found windows. The unique rhythm of your particular existence. Then came a page that stopped your breath. It showed two paths diverging from this very moment. One path was muted, safe, familiar, your life continuing exactly as it had been, comfortable but fading, like a photograph left too long in sunlight. The other path blazed with color, uncertain, uncomfortable, but vibrantly alive. It showed you taking risks, saying yes, opening doors you've been afraid to touch. Not a guarantee of happiness, but a promise of truly living. Neither path was right or wrong. Both were simply choices. On the final page, words wrote themselves as you watched. What story do you want to tell? You closed the book gently, tears streaming down your face, not from sadness but from recognition, from finally seeing yourself clearly. I want to tell a brave story, you whispered. A real one. An alive one. Adelaide smiled with pride and warmth. Then you will. The library has done its work. You're ready to return. She took your hand and led you back down the stairs, through the main hall. The library seemed different now, not less magical, but understood. A teacher, not a keeper. When you leave, you might doubt this was real, Adelaide said as you reached the entrance. But pay attention to how you feel, to the choices you make, to the doors you notice. That's how you'll know the magic is still with you. Through the windows, the first hints of dawn lightened the sky. Thank you, you managed, struggling to find adequate words. For everything. For showing me myself. She kissed your forehead gently. Go and live beautifully. Make mistakes. Take risks. Write your story with courage. And remember, midnight always comes again. The library will be here when you need it. You pushed open the door and stepped into the clean, rain-washed dawn. Behind you, the library faded like morning mist, leaving only a blank brick wall. But you could still smell old books on your clothes. Still feel the warmth of Adelaide's tea. Still remember every word, every revelation. The city was waking, early lights in windows, distant traffic, a bird's first song. Everything looked the same, yet you saw it differently. Each doorway held potential. Each window might contain a story. Magic existed not despite ordinary life, but within it. You reached your apartment as the sky turned from indigo to violet to rose. Climbed the familiar stairs. Entered your space. It looked exactly as you'd left it. But you were different. Fundamentally, irrevocably different. At your window, you watched the sun rise over the city, painting everything gold. You thought about the garden behind the red door, the collector's mirror, your book with its blank pages waiting. You thought about today, this day beginning right now, and all the tomorrows ahead. Not with dread, but with curiosity, with possibility. You didn't have a detailed plan, but you knew you would notice things. Say yes when your instinct was to say no. Take that walk, have that conversation, explore that interest you'd been dismissing. You knew you would be brave. Moving to your bookshelf, you ran your fingers along forgotten spines. One book caught your attention, a novel you didn't remember owning. You carried it to bed, settled under the covers, and began to read as morning light grew stronger. The words welcomed you like old friends. You read slowly, savoring each sentence, letting the story wrap around you like a soft blanket. Your eyes grew heavy. The book rested on your chest as you drifted, the morning light golden and warm on your closed eyelids. You dreamed of a library that appeared at midnight, of an old woman with kind eyes, of a garden where books grew on trees, of a mirror that released you from regret, of a book with your name on it, its pages blank and waiting. But mostly, You dreamed of waking up, of opening your eyes to a new day, of stepping through your door into the world, of saying yes, of beginning again, of living. You stretched, feeling more rested than you had in months. Rising, you went to the window and watched the city pulse with life. Then you noticed it, across the street, on a building you'd seen 1,000 times, a door you'd never really looked at before. It was painted red, bright, poppy red. Probably just an ordinary door. Probably nothing special. But you smiled anyway. Made a mental note to walk past it later, to see where it led. Because that was the library's gift, not a single night of magic, but a lifetime of noticing, of staying open to possibility. You made coffee slowly, savoring each ritual. The sound of water boiling, the smell of fresh grounds, the warmth of the cup. All ordinary, all miraculous. Standing in your kitchen, watching dust motes dance in sunlight, you felt it, deep peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because you were here, fully present in your own life, ready to write the next chapter, ready to tell a brave story. Evening came softly, the sky turning rose and gold. You made simple dinner, ate slowly, tasted each bite. As night fell, you sat at your window watching city lights blink on one by one. The darkness didn't feel lonely. It felt like possibility, like the space between stories where anything could happen. You pulled out a notebook, one you'd bought months ago and never used, and opened it to the first blank page. For a moment, you just sat there, pen in hand. Then you began to write. I found a library tonight, or maybe it found me. The words flowed naturally, as if they'd been waiting inside you all along. You wrote until your hand cramped and your eyes grew heavy, until the page was full and your heart was fuller. Then you closed the notebook, turned off the light, and climbed into bed. Outside, the city breathed its nighttime breath. Inside, you drifted into deep, peaceful sleep. And somewhere between midnight and dawn, on a street most people never see, a golden light began to glow in a window that shouldn't exist. The library was open. Someone else needed it tonight. Someone else was about to discover that magic exists not in distant lands, but here now, in the space between heartbeats. In the pause between question and answer. In the moment when you choose to open a door you've walked past 1,000 times. The library was open, and it would always be open, waiting, patient, ready to show each visitor the truth they most needed to see, that their story matters, that they are capable of transformation, that it's never too late to choose differently, that magic is real. And that home was never a place to reach, but a way of being, a way of seeing, a way of living fully in each precious, ordinary, miraculous moment. The library knows this. And now so do you. Sleep well, traveler. Your story continues tomorrow, and it's going to be beautiful. Rest now. Let the stories you've heard settle into your dreams. Let the peace you found wrap around you like a blanket. Let yourself drift on gentle currents of sleep. Tomorrow awaits, full of possibility, full of wonder, full of your own story, waiting to be written. But tonight you rest. Tonight you dream. Tonight you are held safely in the knowledge that you are exactly where you need to be. The library remembers you. The stories remember you. And when you wake, you'll carry this magic with you into the bright, ordinary, miraculous world. Sleep well. Sleep deep. Your story continues. And it's beautiful, so beautiful. Fade to peaceful silence.